Here is something that nobody prepares you for when you have been married for 26 years. It is not the big moments that define a long marriage. It is not the anniversaries, or the vacations, or the arguments that get resolved, and the ones that do not. It is the small ones. The Tuesday evenings. The way someone takes their coffee. The sound of a key in a front door lock at a specific time on a specific day that becomes, over 26 years, as familiar and as unremarkable as your own breathing. Diana Mitchell knew the sound of Robert's key in the front door the way she knew the sound of her own name. She had been hearing it for 26 years. She had built her entire understanding of what home meant around it. And on a Thursday afternoon in April, sitting at the kitchen table of the house they had shared in Atlanta, Georgia, for 23 of those 26 years, she opened an envelope that had been mailed to their address. The envelope was from a property management company in Charlotte, North Carolina. The letter inside was a routine annual statement. For a property, in her name, that she had never heard of, in a city she had no connection to. Diana read the letter once. Then she read it again. Then she set it down on the kitchen table very carefully, the way you set something down when you are not sure yet whether it is going to detonate. And she sat there in the Thursday afternoon quiet of a house she had believed she knew completely, and she understood, with the specific cold certainty of someone whose body has processed information that her mind is still refusing to organize, that she was about to find out something that was going to change the shape of everything that had come before it. This is the story of Diana Mitchell, a woman who spent 26 years building what she believed was a complete and honest life with a man she trusted completely. A woman who raised 2 children in that life, built a career in that life, buried her mother in that life, celebrated and grieved and laughed and argued and reconciled in that life, and believed at every point along the way that the man she was doing all of it with was doing all of it with her. She was wrong. Not about the marriage itself. The marriage was real. The love was real. The life they built together was real. She was wrong about how much of Robert Mitchell's life she had actually been allowed to see. Because for 26 years, running parallel to the life he shared with Diana in Atlanta, Georgia, Robert Mitchell had been living a second life. In a second city. With a second woman. In a property that was registered in Diana's name without her knowledge. And it had been hiding in plain sight, in the ordinary, unremarkable paper of a routine annual statement. For every single year, she had been too busy living her real life to think to look. Before we go any further into this story, I want you to hold one thing in your mind. Not a dramatic thing. Not the revelation or the betrayal or the legal proceedings or the extraordinary thing that Diana did with her life after all of it came apart. Just one quiet thing. The receipt was for a house. The house was in her name. And the life being lived inside it was not hers. That is the center of this story. Everything else unfolds from there. Now let us go back to where it actually began, which is not the Thursday afternoon in April when the envelope arrived. It is 27 years earlier. When Diana Harmon met Robert Mitchell at a conference in downtown Atlanta and believed, with the wholehearted certainty of a woman who trusted her own instincts, that she had just met someone real. Diana Harmon was born in 1972 in Savannah, Georgia, the eldest of 3 children in a household where her father worked as a high school principal and her mother taught second grade at the same school district for 31 years. It was a household of educators, structured, warm, deeply invested in the idea that the world made more sense when you paid careful attention to it, and that the most important thing you could give a child was the tools to understand what she was looking at. Diana absorbed this completely. She was the kind of student who did not just learn things, but organized them, who built mental frameworks for everything she encountered and tested them continuously against new information and adjusted them when the information required it. She earned a degree in business administration from Spelman College, one of the historically black colleges in Atlanta that she had been dreaming about attending since she was 12 years old, and she graduated in 1994 with the specific confidence of someone who has worked hard for something they genuinely wanted and arrived at it on their own terms. She was 25 years old and 3 years into her career when she attended a professional development conference in downtown Atlanta on a Friday morning in October of 1997 and sat down at a round table in a hotel ballroom and found herself in conversation with a man named Robert Mitchell who was, by the account of every person who knew him then and knows him now, one of the most immediately compelling presences in any room he entered. Robert was 30 years old in 1997, already a senior manager at a commercial real estate development company, tall and well-dressed with the specific ease of someone who had learned early that rooms respond to confidence and had been practicing confidence long enough that it no longer required effort. He was funny in the way that intelligent people are funny, quickly and without trying. He was warm in the way that certain men are warm when they want something, completely and without apparent agenda. He asked Diana questions and listened to her answers with what appeared to be genuine interest, the kind of attention that is rare enough in social settings that when you encounter it you feel, almost involuntarily, that you have been seen. Diana felt it. And Diana, who trusted her instincts because her instincts had generally served her well, believed that what she was feeling was real. She was not wrong about the feeling. She was wrong about what was producing it. They dated for 14 months. They got engaged on a Saturday evening in December of 1998 at a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta with both of their families present, because Robert had arranged the evening with the particular thoroughness of a man who understood that the details of a proposal become part of the story that gets told for decades afterward, and who wanted his story to be told well. They married in June of 1999 at a church in Savannah, Georgia, 3 blocks from the elementary school where Diana's mother had taught for 22 years by then. Diana's father walked her down the aisle with the expression of a man who is trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. Robert's vows were written by him personally, specific and warm, and delivered with the conviction of someone who meant every word. Diana meant every word of hers. She was 27 years old, and she was certain, with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing yourself well enough to trust your own assessment, that she had chosen correctly. That Robert Mitchell was who he appeared to be. That the life they were beginning together was built on something honest and real. She was right about the life. She was not right about the man. They built something genuinely good in Atlanta. A home in a quiet neighborhood in the northwest part of the city, a 4-bedroom house with a backyard and a front porch that Diana planted every spring with flowers she chose carefully and tended with a consistency that the neighbors noticed and occasionally commented on. 2 children, a son named James who was born in 2001 and a daughter named Simone who was born in 2004. Diana continued her career at the accounting firm, eventually making partner in 2008, which was a thing she had been working toward for 7 years and which she celebrated in the way she celebrated most significant achievements, quietly, with the people she loved, without making a production of it. Robert's career in commercial real estate development grew steadily. He traveled for work. Not constantly, not in a way that seemed excessive or suspicious, but regularly. 2 or 3 days most months, occasionally a full week when a project required extended presence. Atlanta to Charlotte was a 45-minute flight or a 3.5-hour drive. Robert made that particular trip, on average, twice a month for 23 years. Diana knew about the Charlotte clients. She knew Charlotte as a city name attached to a category of work obligation. She did not know Charlotte as a place where her husband had a second address, a second relationship, and a second version of himself that he had been maintaining, with extraordinary discipline and extraordinary deception, since the 3rd year of their marriage. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Robert was in Charlotte. He had told Diana he would be back Friday evening, and she had written it on the kitchen calendar in the neat, precise handwriting she used for all the family scheduling, the way she had been writing his travel dates on the kitchen calendar for 23 years. The property management company's letter was addressed to Diana Mitchell at the Atlanta address. It was a routine annual statement for a property located at a specific address in the Myers Park neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina, one of Charlotte's most desirable residential areas. The property was described as a 4-bedroom, single-family residence. The registered owner was listed as Diana Mitchell. The property had been under management for 22 years. Diana had never signed any document related to this property. She had never authorized anyone to register a property in her name. She had never, in 26 years of marriage, heard the address or the property management company's name mentioned in any conversation she could recall. She read the letter 3 times. Then she put it back in the envelope. Then she took it out and read it again. And then she did something that she would later describe as the most important decision she made in the entire process that followed. She did not call Robert. She did not text him. She did not confront him by phone from 300 miles away and give him the opportunity to construct an explanation in the 45 minutes before she could get to him in person. She put the letter in the envelope, put the envelope in the inside pocket of her work bag, and she called her closest friend. Gloria Barnes had been Diana's closest friend since their freshman year at Spelman College, which meant she had been Diana's closest friend for 27 years. She was a woman of formidable practicality and deep loyalty, a family law attorney who had spent 20 years watching marriages end and who understood, better than most people alive, the specific landscape that opened up the moment a document arrived that should not exist. Diana called her and read the letter to her over the phone. Gloria listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state, but which she had learned to deploy in the specific situations where interrupting would cost more than the impulse was worth. When Diana finished reading, Gloria was quiet for 3 full seconds. And then she said, "Do not call Robert. Do not mention this letter when he comes home tomorrow. And come to my office Monday morning." Diana asked why Monday. Gloria said, "Because between now and Monday, I need to make some phone calls." Diana asked what kind of phone calls. Gloria said the kind that will tell us whether we are dealing with something administrative and explainable or something that requires a completely different category of response. She went through the rest of Thursday and all of Friday with the letter in her work bag and the weight of it sitting in her chest in a way that she managed by staying in motion. Picking up Simone from school, attending a late afternoon client meeting, making dinner, watching television with James who was home from college for the weekend, going to bed at the usual time in the usual way, and lying in the dark next to the empty space where Robert would be back tomorrow and not sleeping. Robert arrived home Friday evening at 6:47 as predicted. He kissed her on the cheek at the front door the way he had kissed her on the cheek at the front door thousands of times. He asked about her week. She told him about her week. He told her about his week in Charlotte, the client meetings, the site visit, the dinner with the development team that had run later than expected. She listened. She nodded at the right moments. She asked the questions a wife asks after a week apart. She watched his face while he answered and looked for something she had apparently been failing to look for 23 years. The specific quality of a person performing authenticity rather than simply having it. She thought she saw it. She was not certain. She put her uncertainty in the same place she had put the envelope, in a pocket that she was keeping very carefully closed. Gloria's phone calls over the weekend produced the first concrete piece of information. A basic public records search on the Charlotte property confirmed that it had been purchased in 1999, the same year Diana and Robert were married, and registered in Diana's name using her correct date of birth, her correct social security number, and a signature on the purchase documents that was either Diana's actual signature or a very precise reproduction of it. Gloria had a forensic document examiner she had worked with on previous cases. She made an appointment for the following week. But the public records search had also produced something else. Something that Gloria delivered to Diana on Monday morning in her law office on the 4th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, with the particular gentleness of someone who is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. The property in Charlotte had not always been empty between Robert's visits. The utilities registered to the address showed consistent usage patterns of a property that was occupied. Not occasionally, regularly. The property had, by the evidence of its utility consumption, been a primary residence for someone for 22 years. And the name on the utilities was not Diana Mitchell. It was Angela Pierce. Diana heard the name and did not immediately speak. Gloria gave her the time. The office was quiet in the way that offices go quiet when the thing that needed to be said has been said, and the only remaining question is what the person who received it is going to do with it. Diana sat with the name for a long moment. And then she asked the question that was underneath the name. The question that was underneath all of it. She asked how long. Gloria said the utility records went back 22 years, but the property itself had been purchased in 1999. Diana did the arithmetic without being asked to. 1999 was the year they were married. The property had been purchased the year they were married, which meant that Robert Mitchell had, in the same year that he stood in a church in Savannah and delivered personal vows to the woman he was choosing as his partner for life, also arranged a property in Charlotte in that woman's name and begun establishing what would become a 22-year second residence. Not after the marriage had developed problems. Not in response to something that went wrong over time. From the beginning. From the very start of everything. Diana looked at Gloria across the desk and said very quietly, "He did this from the beginning." Gloria said yes. "It appears he did." Diana said, "Our entire marriage." Gloria said, "That is what the records suggest." Diana nodded once. And then she said, I need to know everything. I need to know who Angela Pierce is. I need to know what the life in Charlotte looks like. And I need to know exactly what my name was used for and why. Gloria said, that is exactly what we are going to find out. And she picked up her phone and called Frank Delgado. Frank Delgado was a private investigator in his late 50s who had spent the first 20 years of his career with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation before retiring into private practice. He was methodical and thorough and completely without sentiment in the way that certain professionals become completely without sentiment after 2 decades of watching the full range of what human beings do to each other and deciding that the most useful thing he could offer was accuracy rather than judgment. He was not the kind of investigator who told you what you wanted to hear. He was the kind who gave you what the evidence showed and let you decide what to do with it. Gloria had worked with him on multiple cases over 15 years and trusted him in the specific way that professionals trust each other after repeated collaboration, not warmly, but completely. He took Diana's case and spent 2 weeks documenting before he brought a single finding back to Gloria's office. What he found was not simple. It was not the portrait of a man who had maintained a casual arrangement on the side for personal reasons that had nothing to do with his primary life. It was the portrait of a man who had been living, with extraordinary organizational discipline, 2 parallel lives of approximately equal substance and investment. Angela Pierce was 44 years old. She had been living in the Myers Park property in Charlotte for 22 years. She worked as a hospital administrator at a major Charlotte medical center. She was, by every account Frank could document, a woman of significant intelligence and professional accomplishment, the kind of person who, like Diana, would have had no reason to question the structure of her relationship with Robert Mitchell because the structure of it had been presented to her as complete and honest. She had a daughter. The daughter was 19 years old. Her name was Renee. She had Robert Mitchell's last name. She had, in documented records, been claimed as a dependent on Robert Mitchell's taxes for 19 years, taxes that had been filed separately from the joint return he filed with Diana. Using a separate tax identification arrangement that his accountant had, Frank discovered, structured specifically to avoid any cross-reference between the 2 filings. Robert Mitchell had not simply been conducting an affair. He had been simultaneously a husband and father in Atlanta and a partner and father in Charlotte for 22 years. He had organized both lives with the precision and the forward planning of someone who had decided, very early on, that he was going to maintain both indefinitely and had built the administrative architecture to support that decision. The property in Diana's name was the piece of the architecture that Frank found most significant. It had been registered in Diana's name using her legitimate identification documents, documents that Robert had access to as her husband, without her knowledge or consent at the time of the purchase. Frank's analysis, supported by the forensic document examiner Gloria had engaged, determined that the signature on the original purchase documents was not Diana's actual signature. It was a reproduction, precise enough to pass a routine bank review, but distinguishable under forensic analysis from the authenticated samples of Diana's signature on documents she had personally signed over the same period. The property had been registered in Diana's name for a specific reason that Robert's financial records, once subpoenaed through the legal proceedings Gloria initiated, made entirely clear. The Charlotte property was structured as part of a broader real estate holding portfolio that Robert maintained separately from the marital estate. By registering it in Diana's name rather than his own, he had insulated it from certain categories of corporate liability connected to his development work. Diana's name on the deed was not an expression of intention to include her in that life. It was a tool. Her identity had been used as a legal instrument in the construction of a life she did not know existed. Diana received Frank's full report on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the envelope had arrived on her kitchen table. She read every page. She asked questions and received answers. She looked at the photographs Frank had taken in Charlotte, the house in Myers Park, the woman who lived in it, the young woman with Robert Mitchell's last name who was 19 years old and had grown up in that house with her mother. 26 years. 2 cities. 2 families. One man who had organized himself so carefully between them that neither family had ever had a real reason to look for the other. Diana looked at every photograph. And then she looked at Gloria and said, I want to understand everything he used my name for. Every document. Every account. Every legal structure. I want to know exactly what my identity was used to build in a life I was never allowed to know about. And then I want to know exactly how to take it apart. The legal proceedings that followed were managed by Gloria with the thoroughness and precision that 20 years of family law practice had developed in her. The first step was a complete forensic audit of every financial and legal document that bore Diana's name, not just in connection with the Charlotte property, but across the full scope of Robert's professional and personal holdings. What the audit revealed was that the Charlotte property was not the only instance in which Diana's name and identification had been used in the construction of Robert's parallel financial life. There were 2 additional investment properties in the Charlotte metropolitan area, both registered through holding structures that traced back to Diana's identity. There was a business loan from 2007 that bore her name as a co-signatory, a signature that the forensic examiner again determined was not Diana's. There was a line of credit from 2011. The total financial exposure attached to Diana's name without her knowledge or consent, when Gloria's team completed the audit, was substantial. Robert Mitchell had not simply maintained a second life in a second city. He had financed significant portions of that second life using the legal and financial identity of his wife in the first one. When Gloria presented the full audit findings to Robert's attorney, the conversation that followed was, by the account of everyone in the room, one of the shorter and more consequential conversations in the professional experience of everyone involved. Robert's attorney was a competent and experienced man who had been practicing in Atlanta for 30 years. He reviewed the documents in silence for a long time. And then he said, in a tone that communicated that he was choosing his next words very carefully, that he thought his client would benefit from understanding the full scope of what the opposing documentation contained before any positions were formalized. Robert's attorney requested a 2-week recess from formal proceedings to consult with his client. Gloria agreed to the recess. She used the 2 weeks to file the additional fraud documentation with the relevant financial institutions and to ensure that every legal structure bearing Diana's name, without her authorization, had been formally flagged for review. Robert requested a conversation with Diana, not through their attorneys. In person, Diana agreed to it with Gloria present, which Robert accepted. He came to Gloria's conference room on a Thursday afternoon wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who has been through every available internal argument and has arrived, finally and without recourse, at the specific humility of someone who has run out of positions that serve him. He did not offer the explanation that Diana had been preparing herself for, the one built on the vocabulary of emotional complexity and circumstances beyond control and the inadequacy of any single narrative to capture the full truth of a complicated human situation. He did not say it was not what it looked like. He did not say it had been a mistake that had grown beyond his ability to correct. He sat across the table from the woman he had been married to for 26 years, and he said, "I do not have an explanation that is equal to what I did. I am not going to insult you by pretending that I do." Diana looked at him for a long time. And then she said, "I am not here for your explanation. I am here so that you understand, directly from me and not through attorneys, that every document bearing my name that I did not sign is going to be addressed. Every property, every account, every line of credit, every structure. My name was used to build something I was not part of, and I am going to ensure that my name is removed from every part of it with the full legal force of everything that the documentation supports." Robert said he understood. Diana said, "I am not finished. The daughter in Charlotte. Her name, her birth record, her taxes. Those are going to require their own process, and I want you to understand that I am aware of every element of it, and none of it is going to be overlooked." Robert was quiet. Gloria watched him. Diana did not look away from his face once during the entire conversation. When it was over, she stood up and walked out of the conference room and did not look back. Gloria stayed seated. She looked at Robert for a moment, and then she picked up her pen and went back to her notes. The divorce was finalized 11 months after the envelope arrived on the kitchen table. The settlement, which reflected the full scope of the financial documentation and the fraud findings, was comprehensive. The 3 Charlotte properties, all of which had been financed in part through Diana's identity without her consent, were addressed within the settlement structure. The marital estate in Atlanta, the house, the shared investments, the accumulated assets of 26 years of 2 professional incomes, was divided with the specific attention to detail that Gloria brought to everything. Diana did not take anything she had not built. She took everything she had. The distinction mattered to her enormously. She was precise about it in a way that her attorneys noted and respected. She was not interested in punitive extraction. She was interested in accurate accounting, in knowing exactly what was hers and ensuring that it was recognized as hers by every document that bore her name going forward. James and Simone, Diana's children, both of whom were adults by the time the proceedings concluded, navigated the revelations about their father with the specific difficulty of children who are no longer children, but who discover that the foundation of their childhood was not what they understood it to be. Diana was careful with them in the way she was careful about everything, present and honest, and unwilling to perform a composure she did not actually have, but also unwilling to direct her grief at them in a way that made their processing of it harder. She told James and Simone what they needed to know. She answered their questions directly. She let them feel what they needed to feel without managing it for them. She told them once, in a conversation that James has since described in terms that suggest it stays with him, that their father's choices were his alone, and that nothing he had done changed the reality of what their family had been. The dinners, the school events, the vacations, the ordinary Tuesday evenings that had been the actual substance of their life together. Those things had been real. The people in them had been real. The love had been real. It had simply been incomplete in a way that none of them had been allowed to know about. She said, "What he did does not belong to you. It belongs to him. And you are allowed to feel however you feel about it without feeling like the feeling means something about who you are or what your life was." James said later that sentence was the most useful thing anyone said to him during that entire period. What Diana built in the 2 years following the divorce was, in the characteristically quiet and precise way she built most things, something worth describing in full. She did not make a public announcement about what had happened to her. She did not give interviews. She did not post about it. She did not perform her recovery for anyone who was watching. She simply went about the work of understanding what she wanted the next chapter of her life to look like, with the same organized intelligence she brought to everything else, and she built it accordingly. She had been a partner at her accounting firm for 15 years by the time the divorce was finalized. She was, professionally, exactly where she would have been regardless of anything Robert had done, because her career had always been hers, built on her own work, sustained by her own competence, entirely independent of the man she had been married to. That was not a small thing. It was in many ways the thing that made every other step she took afterward possible. She had never allowed her professional identity to become dependent on her marital one. Dorothy Harmon had made that structural choice deliberately. Diana Mitchell had made it without quite framing it that way, but the result was the same. When the marriage ended, what remained of Diana's life was substantial. It was her own. She made one significant change that first year after the divorce that everyone who knew her understood immediately as both practical and deeply personal. She changed her name. Not back to Harmon, her birth name. She kept Mitchell because James and Simone were Mitchells, and she was their mother, and that name belonged to the relationship with them, which was entirely real and entirely hers. But she updated every professional and legal document to reflect that her identity was completely her own, documented, accurate, authorized, and not attached to any structure she had not personally signed. Her attorney, Catherine, who had joined Gloria's team midway through the proceedings and had become someone Diana trusted significantly, said later that watching Diana work through the document review process had been one of the most methodically thorough exercises in personal legal reclamation she had witnessed in 20 years of practice. Diana made sure every document was right. Every signature was hers. Every registration was authorized. Every account was correctly attributed. It took 8 months. She did not consider this excessive. She considered it necessary. She also did something else that first year. She reached out to Gloria, not in a professional capacity, but in the capacity of the woman who had been her closest friend for 27 years and who had, in the preceding year, given her more practically useful support than Diana had words to adequately acknowledge. She took Gloria to dinner at a restaurant they had been going to together since their Spelman days, a place that had changed owners twice, but had somehow maintained the specific quality of the food and the light that had made it their place for 27 years. And over dinner, she said something to Gloria that Gloria repeated to her husband that same evening. Diana said, "I have been thinking about what this past year would have looked like without you. and I cannot construct a version of it that ends in the same place. You did not just help me. You showed me what it means to have someone who shows up for the right reason. Not because it is convenient. Not because it costs them nothing. Because they decided a long time ago that you were worth showing up for. Gloria was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, "You were always going to be okay, Diana. I just made sure the paperwork reflected it." Diana laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in what felt like a very long time. And it sounded, by Gloria's account, exactly like the laugh she had heard for 27 years. The question that people ask most often when they hear Diana's story is whether she was angry. The answer is complicated, and she has given it carefully on the occasions when she has chosen to speak about any of this at all. Of course she was angry. 26 years of honest investment in a life that was being simultaneously operated in a way she had no knowledge of. 26 years of a partner making decisions that affected her identity, her finances, her legal standing, and the emotional reality of her daily life, without ever consulting her or disclosing the full picture to her. That is something a person has the right to be angry about, and Diana exercised that right fully and without apology during the period of the legal proceedings. But the anger, she has said, was not the primary experience. The primary experience was something more specific and in some ways more difficult to name. It was the experience of realizing that the instrument she had used to understand her own life, her own careful, organized, professionally developed capacity for reading situations accurately, had been consistently and deliberately circumvented. Robert had not simply deceived her. He had worked to maintain her trust actively and specifically so that her trust would not trigger the investigation that her intelligence would otherwise have produced. He had kept her believing in the completeness of the picture because he understood that if she ever had reason to look for what was missing, she would find it. The deception was not passive. It was a continuous active project. An understanding that changed the nature of the anger. It made it less about what had been hidden and more about the specific effort that had gone into the hiding. She has also been asked what she would say to the woman in Charlotte, to Angela Pierce. And here Diana's answer is the one that surprises people most. She would say, "I do not know what you were told. I do not know how your life was framed to you or what explanation was offered for the parts of it that required explanation. I do not know whether you knew about me or believed, as I believed about you, that you were the only one. What I know is that a man who is capable of this level of sustained deception is capable of it in all directions. And whatever you were told, whatever you believed, the life you were living was also not the complete picture." Here is what Diana Mitchell's story is really about underneath the receipts and the property records and the forensic signature analysis and the 11 months of legal proceedings. It is about the specific cost of a certain kind of trust, not naive trust, not willful blindness, but the trust that is the natural consequence of investing honestly in a life you have built carefully and completely. Diana did not miss the signs because she was careless. She missed them because Robert Mitchell had spent 26 years ensuring there were no signs to miss. The deception was not the result of a mistake or a moment of weakness or a situation that grew beyond its original scope. It was a choice made at the beginning and maintained every single day for more than 2 decades. And the most important thing Diana's story tells us about that kind of choice is not what it looks like from the outside when it is finally uncovered. She is still in the Atlanta house. She kept it because it was hers, genuinely and documentably hers, purchased with money she had earned, maintained with choices she had made, planted with flowers she had chosen every spring for 23 years. She did not see why a man's decision to lead a double life should also cost her the front porch. James comes home for Christmas, and Simone comes for Thanksgiving, and Gloria comes for dinner on the last Friday of every month the way she has been coming for 27 years. The accounting firm partnership is secure, and the work is meaningful, and the career she built entirely on her own competence continues to be exactly what it has always been. Hers, completely, and without qualification, in a way that nothing Robert Mitchell did or did not do has ever been able to touch. She reads more than she used to. She travels more than she used to, alone or with Gloria or with Simone when their schedules align. She has, in the 2 years since the divorce was finalized, become someone who moves through her own life with a particular kind of deliberateness that the people who know her describe as new and that Diana herself describes as simply more visible. She was always deliberate. She is simply no longer deploying that deliberateness on behalf of a picture that was not complete. She is using it entirely on her own behalf, on the life that is actually hers. Here is the question this story leaves me with, and I want you to sit with it genuinely rather than answering it quickly. We talk a lot, in stories like this, about the signs that were missed, about what the person who was deceived should have noticed, should have checked, should have questioned. And I want to push back on that framing directly and clearly. Diana Mitchell missed nothing she had been given reason to look for. She was deceived by someone who understood her intelligence well enough to engineer around it for 26 years. The question is not what she should have seen. The question is what kind of person organizes that much of their life around the sustained management of another person's accurate understanding of reality, and what it says about the relationship between trust and accountability, about the fact that trust, the real kind, is not something you earn once and spend forever. It is something that has to be renewable, something that has to be re-earned regularly by the simple act of continuing to be who you said you were. Robert Mitchell stopped earning Diana's trust on the day he decided her trust was more useful to him maintained than it was worth being honest with. And 26 years later, a routine annual statement from a property management company in Charlotte, North Carolina arrived in the mail, and the trust he had borrowed for 2.5 decades was over. A single receipt. That is all it took. That is all it ever takes. The truth does not require a dramatic entrance. It simply requires a door to be left slightly open. And eventually, always, eventually, the light gets in. Before we close tonight, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me the specific moment in Diana's story that stopped you. Was it the discovery of the receipt? The specific ordinary smallness of how the truth arrived after 26 years? Was it the forensic signature analysis? The confirmation that her own name had been reproduced without her knowledge? Was it the utility records showing 22 years of consistent occupancy? Was it the daughter in Charlotte with Robert Mitchell's last name? Was it the moment Diana sat across from Robert in Gloria's conference room and told him directly what was going to happen to every document bearing her name? Tell me your moment. Drop it in the comments with the timestamp. Because I read every single comment this community leaves, and the moments you notice are never the moments I expect, and that difference is exactly why this conversation is worth having every single week. And while you are in the comments, please let us know where you are watching from tonight. This community watches from places that genuinely humble me, and knowing where you are makes every story feel more connected and more worth the telling. If you are not yet subscribed to Psych Tales TV, please hit that button right now. We are here every week with stories like Diana's, stories about the gap between the life people present and the life they are actually living, and what happens when the gap finally closes. Real stories, deep truths, the psychology behind everything. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one.